Hi, I'm Lucas Gilkey with Hometown Hero, and today we're here with Mark Krause from Krause Analytical, and today we're going to talk about his work on cannabinoids and all the wonderful things that he's been doing for our industry and pick his brain for a little bit and kind of see where it goes. So thank you for joining us. Mark, if you could, please tell us about yourself. Give us some background.
So I'm a chemist. I graduated from Texas Lutheran in 1978. I've been in chemistry ever since. I've been in...
How many years?
Oh, this is 46, 47 years. I've been in almost every aspect of analytical chemistry that you can imagine. We've done petroleum, pharma, environmental, we do food testing. We've been now in the cannabis space to a certain extent, and with the time and experience, I've seen a lot. We have a laboratory that does testing of every kind that you can imagine, and most of what we do is produced for court cases.
Interesting. So right now, one of the hot topics that sort of the DEA has put itself into, and now we're seeing it pop up in Texas and other states as well in the legislative sessions, is the term synthesis versus synthetic and how they are used and in what circumstances they're used, and people creating new definitions for these words, and it's sort of turned into this kind of wild argument about definition of words that's fascinating. But I wanted to kind of get your take on it. You've got a very interesting take on it, and somebody that I believe is probably best positioned to understand it almost better than anybody else. And I wanted to kind of hear your thoughts on that, if you're okay with that.
So synthesis is a technical term in chemistry. It has a very defined meaning in chemistry. A lot of words that we use daily have this kind of thing. For example, you may say, you know, I have a theory. Well, a theory to you is a thought, right? A concept. A theory in science is a very specific concept that means it's been proven over and over and over again to be true.
Yeah.
So when we talk about synthesis, synthesis or synthetic in chemistry means the reaction between two or more compounds to create a new compound or compounds. So it's a defined meaning. So when we say synthetic chemistry, we're talking about reacting compounds together in a certain manner to get a new compound. This is not how it's being used in general use. General use is distinguishing, for example, someone on the street, if you ask them, is that synthetic? They would contrast that with, is that organic, right?
Correct.
That's not what it means in chemistry terms.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we hear people say, well, this is synthetic, typically they don't mean it in a chemistry manner.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of the new work that's being done in the regulations revolves around people trying to determine if certain cannabinoids are synthetic. Right?
Well, now we're hearing a new word too, which is biosynthesis, which I've never heard before. So I guess explain that to me.
Biosynthesis has a real meaning also. Okay, so biosynthesis means that it's produced in a cellular fashion. So it's produced by an organism. So either a plant or a mammal, take your pick. But so they use biosynthesis would use enzymes. Okay, so you start with a compound, you enzymatically react it with another compound. There's our synthesis. We've got two compounds.
So would biosynthesis be milk?
Milk is a biosynthetic product. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Food goes in the cow and milk comes out.
Food goes in the cow, milk comes out. The same thing is true in the cannabinoid space. For example, THC. THC is the end product of a really long biosynthetic chain. Okay, starts way back here with the Livitol and turns into levitolic acid, then it turns into CBG, then it turns into CBD, and these are acids, CBGA, CBDA, then it becomes THCA, and ultimately it becomes THC. And so that whole process, enzymatic process, would be called biosynthesis. But in chemistry terms, strictly chemistry terms, synthesis and biosynthesis are indistinguishable. So I can use the same compounds in a laboratory, in a beaker, use those enzymes, and end up in the same place, and you can't tell the difference between the laboratory-made THC biosynthetically and the plant-made THC biosynthetically.
It's the same chemical.
It's the same chemical.
Yeah. Interesting. So from your perspective, are there any cannabinoids right now that you would consider on the market that are in fact synthetic?
Yes.
What?
There are certain cannabinoids that can't be produced, or I shouldn't say can't. We don't know how to produce enzymatically. Okay, so we don't know.
What do you mean when you say produce enzymatically?
So the plant uses enzymes. Enzymes are catalysts. They're specific catalysts. We don't know the pathway to use the enzymes to make certain compounds.
Got it.
For example, THC acetate, which people call THCO.
Yeah.
Okay. So THC acetate is made in the laboratory by reacting acetic anhydride and THC. We don't know of an equivalent pathway in the plant. That's not to say that it doesn't exist.
We just haven't found it yet.
We haven't found it. It may be there. Acetylation is a very important biological function. You repair DNA through an acetylation process. So we know that all cells use acetylation. We just haven't found any indication that acetylation is occurring with THC. I'm not saying it doesn't, I'm just saying we don't know of it yet.
Got it. So in your opinion, would THCO be considered synthetic then?
Okay, so THC acetate that's on the market is synthetic, no question, because we can't isolate it from the plant. We can't call it a phytochemical, right? So it's synthetic, but the ability to produce it in the plant may exist. We just don't know whether it does or not. We can't make the distinction between synthetic THC acetate and bioproduced THC acetate because we don't know if this exists.
Yeah, interesting. And you also have a different perspective on, which I love. I love having people on that have different perspectives of sort of what the standard is, because I think it's important as an industry that we understand there's people with different knowledge sets that bring things to the table that allow us to kind of understand the complexity of this industry. I don't think people understand how complex it is chemically as we're trying to navigate this and understand, along with, at the same time, sort of the regulatory side and words being sort of misused and misdefined. And there's all these moving parts in this industry that I think a lot of people don't fully understand. And talking to you, it's really fascinating. And your view on THCO from the regulatory standpoint in regards to the Farm Bill and the subsequent states that adopted the rules from the Farm Bill is pretty fascinating. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that a little bit because I think it's an interesting and different perspective that I like to hear.
So one of the things I do a lot is I do expert witness. And so part of what I do as an expert is I take rather difficult scientific concepts and I translate them into something that a lawyer can understand. Yeah. You've worked with some lawyers. You know a few.
A few.
A few. You know a handful. Okay. If you put 80 lawyers in a room, you get 79 opinions. 2 of them inadvertently agree with each other. They don't mean to, but they kind of inadvertently agree with each other. Now, obviously, they like their opinions, and they like them even more if they're charging you for it. But legal opinions are legal opinions. Yeah. Science doesn't work that way. Science deals in black and white, right? So a scientific reality is a reality, but science has error associated with that reality, right? So we use very specific words to define what we mean when we're talking about a scientific concept. Yeah. So you and I just use synthesis. Okay? That's a very specific, chemistry-wise, that's a very specific concept. Yeah. We're reacting these compounds. Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to read you a little. I just happen to have, it's amazing how I happen to have this with me. We're going to read
it's like you knew what we were going to talk about today.
Almost as if we knew that. So the USDA defines, in their Farm Bill, they define the meaning of hemp.
Yes.
They do this in 2018. Yep. As you know, since about the day after they did this, it's been rather controversial, and we've all fought about it like cats and dogs for forever, right? Yep. So I want to just read what it says. It says, Cannabis sativa L, that's a plant. Yep. And any part of that plant, including the seeds of the plant, and all derivatives, extracts, cannabinoids, isomers, acids, salts, and salts of isomers, whether growing or not, with a delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol concentration of not more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis.
Yep.
Okay, I want to pick on a specific word here. They put it first, and they probably shouldn't have put it first because it's kind of out of order.
Yeah.
But we say all derivatives. Okay. Derivative, if you ask a stockbroker, derivative is something very specific to him, okay? It's a way that you buy stock. You ask a chemist, he doesn't talk about stock at all, right? So derivative is actually a specific form of a synthesis.
Okay.
Okay? So derivative, we take two compounds, we react them together under set conditions, and we end up with a new compound. So when USDA puts derivative...
So it's similar to synthesis, it sounds like.
It is a synthesis.
Okay.
So when USDA puts the word derivative into the definition of hemp...
And it's the first word, isn't it?
It's the first word.
So arguably the most important word.
Well, they may have seen it that way.
Yeah.
That's real possible. I mean, I look at that sentence and I say, okay, yeah, I know some folk at USDA. Good people, really good scientists, really solid science. You know, they probably looked at this when they were writing it and they said, you know, old Krause down there in Austin, he's probably going to read this sentence. We better make it pretty simple, okay? So they made it really simple in chemistry terms. Every single one of those terms is a very specific chemistry term. It's not a legal term. It's not a stockbroker term. It's not an accounting term. It's a chemistry term. So when we talk about derivatives in chemistry, USDA is telling us, without a doubt, hey, you can go do these syntheses. You can take this plant and you can create synthetically derived compounds. And what's interesting here is, as you know, as we talked about just a minute ago, lawyers all disagree, right? They're all arguing that, what does this word mean in court?
Yeah.
I've read this to over a dozen chemists that I know, good chemists. Every single one of us agrees what it says. Every single one of us reads it exactly the same way, which is if it starts with legal hemp, it's legal.
So let's talk about let's touch on the most recent letter to the DEA, because this is fascinating. This gets really fascinating to me. And we took a position on it, and just so everybody's clear, the position that we took on it with not selling THCO is largely based on we're involved in a lawsuit in Texas. We're in a legislative session. There's a lot of stuff that's happening with us that we're a constant target. So we really have to be kind of the Boy Scouts in the industry. And when the DEA comes out and says, hey, this is illegal, whether or not we agree with it, we're kind of in a position where we sort of have to abide by it. And I even said in our video when we came out and talked about that, I don't agree with the DEA position, and you've sort of emphatically confirmed that, you know, their position is incorrect. But the problem is, if somebody from law enforcement wants to take their position and enforce it, it's going to really create a mess.
Yes.
And it's for us, selling THCO is not worth the possible complexities on top of what else we're dealing with, or putting our potential customers at risk in dealing with local law enforcement. So we have made the decision and the position that we will not sell THCO because we don't want to put our customers at risk with law enforcement. Now, that being said, I do think the DEA is wrong, and we as a company believe the DEA is wrong, but somebody needs to potentially, in my opinion, somebody needs to sue them and essentially do what we did in Texas to prove that they're wrong, although it's pretty obvious they're wrong. And I wanted you to talk on that because it's super fascinating when you start getting into these nuances and these complexities and these regulations being created by people that are sort of misusing some of the wording to make things happen the way they want it to happen.
Okay, a little while ago, you and I were talking about part of this, and I used a comparison. I said, you wouldn't go to the EPA. If IRS comes and knocks on your door and says, you owe me $22,000, you wouldn't go to the EPA to get an interpretation of the IRS regulations.
Correct.
Okay. And you wouldn't go to the DEA to get an interpretation of the USDA regulation, because in the DEA Controlled Substances Act, as you come down, there's a little line that says, are you hemp? And there's literally an arrow, okay, that points and says, oh, go out here to this USDA regulation. They literally kick you out at the head of the Controlled Substances Act. They kick you out. They kick you out and say, we don't want you. We don't want to. You're not us. We don't want to deal with you. Go over here to USDA.
If it's hemp.
If it's hemp.
Yeah.
Okay. So
just to clarify, irregardless of how you got there, if it came from hemp, it kicks you out.
That's right. If it's legal, if you have legal hemp, a legally hemp-derived product, it kicks you out.
No matter what the final chemical is.
No matter what you got.
Okay.
You could have pick one. You could have 5-MeO DMT. If you legally derived it from hemp, they kick you out.
That's why.
Okay.
Okay.
Now let's go down a step further.
Yeah.
What DEA says, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit here. What DEA says is correct. If you're actually in their regulation, THC acetate is illegal. It is synthetic cannabinoid. It is an analog of THC. It is clearly illegal if you're in the CSA. So the question you have to ask yourself is, you know, they didn't want me, okay? You know, after, hey, I came and said, oh, hey, DEA, here I am. And they go, I don't want you. You're hemp. Get out of here, right?
Yeah.
So you're over here. How did you get back?
So it's sort of a catch-22.
Okay.
They're saying it's illegal, but they're also saying if it's hemp, they can't.
That's right.
It's not in their authority.
They didn't tell you that hemp-derived THCO is illegal. They told you THC acetate, synthetic THC acetate is illegal. It is. It'd be considered to be a concentrate, intent to distribute. It's illegal in the CSA. If you're in the CSA, it's a Schedule 1. It's highly illegal.
So I guess it is in a way set up to be argued. Somebody's going to have to argue it, but it is in a way set up to be argued that because it's hemp, it's outside their purview.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's been argued. So there was a court case where, and I'm paraphrasing stuff here, and forgive me, all you lawyers who are watching this. I'm not a lawyer. Don't take this as legal advice. Basically, the DEA got told in a circuit court, why are you trying to make this interpretation? It's their regulation. It's USDA's regulation. Yeah. Let USDA interpret the regulation. You guys don't have anything to do with that regulation. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Okay. So I read that letter, because I've read the same letter that you're talking about. And I read that letter and I look at that and I go, you know, DEA is correct. If I'm in the Controlled Substances Act, oh, it's illegal, no question. But I'm not, because I started with legal hemp. I did everything that the USDA said in their little statement, right? I have a derivative of a hemp-derived cannabinoid. I'm still inside US. I don't have more than 0.3% Delta-9 THC. I'm within USDA. I'm not in the Controlled Substances Act. Doesn't apply to me.
Interesting. Interesting. That's super fascinating. It takes me a minute to process all that.
Yeah, no, I understand. And it's something that you don't, unfortunately, you don't hear enough of in the industry, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm telling you this because I've dealt with FDA regulations and EPA regulations. This is most of my career dealing with regulations. Yeah. And so when I look at this, the first thing that occurs to me is, okay, they kicked me out. Purposefully kicked me out. I mean, kind of rudely also, and put an arrow. I mean, that's a little bit rude. And then they try to tell me that somehow I got back in, but no, I didn't get back in. So whatever they have over here doesn't apply to what I have over there.
They're trying to double dip a little bit.
Well,
why would the DEA care so much? And obviously we're getting some, my word, not scientific. We're getting some theoreticals here.
Theoretical.
What advantage would the DEA have in sort of wanting to regulate this or wanting to get involved when it's pretty obviously USDA territory?
And this is purely opinion. It's political. Okay.
Which makes sense. I mean, this is a highly. I mean, we're in the legislative session in Texas. This industry is highly political, whether people realize it or not. A large portion of what we do. I mean, we have a team of people here that are literally here for the political and legislative and regulatory. And so I don't know if everybody fully understands how political hemp has gotten, but it's extremely political at this point. And if we don't consistently fight, there are a multitude of groups that will push to get rid of it.
Yes. And I think that's what you're seeing at a federal level is there's clearly two camps, right? There are people who are all in favor of hemp, who are all in on hemp, and there are very powerful, big groups that are completely opposed to the presence of consumable hemp. And I think you're seeing some political pressure being put on DEA. And to be honest with you, I thought it was a very well-crafted letter. I thought it was very carefully worded. And I thought they made their position very, very plain without actually stepping over that line. Okay, I mean, I looked at that and said, "Man, somebody put a lot of work into that." Okay,
I agree with that.
Yeah,
it was for how short it was. It was very to the point.
Very to the point, but it was also very careful to not step over that line.
Yeah, they were coached.
They never claimed that if you had hemp-derived THC acetate that it was illegal. They didn't say that.
Correct.
They did not say that.
Correct.
Okay. So, you know, from their standpoint, I'm sure it was a political pressure thing. I'm not sure. Again, it's an opinion. I'm not sure of it because I'm not there. Yeah. Right. But I look at that and say, boy, somebody put a lot of pressure on these folks to do
Well, there's no other reason for them to do it.
That's right. There isn't. They got their plates full. Look, we got a fentanyl crisis in this country.
Yeah.
We got all kinds of stuff flowing across the border. They don't have time to mess with this.
Yeah, as far as I know and what I've been told, the DEA has largely stopped really doing too much enforcement around cannabis. I know they were doing, like, you know, back in the day, they would do raids in California, the dispensaries and other stuff from a federal standpoint, enforcing federal law in states. But I haven't heard about those in a while. It seems like they've largely left cannabis alone. A lot of, even the state level agencies here in Texas, you know, I think in Austin you're allowed to have up to like 4 ounces on your person. You know, we're starting to see even in highly conservative states, the cannabis laws are loosening. The DEA doesn't seem to care as much. So I would, you know, tend to agree with you. I think this is largely political.
And, I mean, DEA still enforces. You know, if you're a complete genius and you load 10,000 pounds into a trailer and you drive it from Oregon to Texas, yeah, you'll get a knock from the DEA.
Yeah.
They'll come visit you, okay? But you got to be that kind of genius level for the DEA to get involved in marijuana, right? Yeah. It's not high on their needs list right at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think you see, especially when they take polls, you see political opinion swinging to where it's like, okay, why is this illegal?
Well,
why are we throwing people in jail for this?
I think 80% in Texas. We're over 80% now that more than 80% of Texans want to see cannabis legalized in Texas. Marijuana specifically, but we're getting into a weird spot where, you know, people are starting to understand that the hemp products are legal. They can get products that are effective and they're available. You don't have to go through all this sort of, you know, get a prescription with a doctor. And, you know, some people really push on the medical side for cannabis products, but the reality is they aren't very harmful. You know, more people have injuries from toothpaste a year than cannabis. So it's one of these things where it's like, wait, why are we forcing people to go through all these hoops and all these different things to get a product that is much less harmful than many things already on the market? You know, and so we're kind of in this weird place.
Especially in Texas. I think Texas is in a very strange situation. And that we created this back in 2020. We create this regulatory framework, which we call House Bill 1325.
2019.
Okay, 2019. And y'all would know that way better than I do. So, and we create this framework, and then we dictatorially tell DSHS and TD and Texas Department of Agriculture, hey, you're the lucky recipients of this program. You get to go write regulations.
Go figure it out.
Guess what, boys? We got $0 for you. Zero. Right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, you know, and so we're in a really funny situation because there's no funding. There's no impetus other than at a county level to go enforce. As you pointed out earlier, there are some extremely conservative counties in Texas. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of liberal ones. Harris, Travis are pretty liberal, Williamson. But there's a Brazoria and Brazos and some of the West Texas counties that are really conservative. Yeah. And man, they catch you with a vape, they're going to throw the book at you.
Yeah.
So we're in flux, right? I agree. I think most of the people don't want to see you get thrown in jail because you have 3 drops of a Delta 8 concentrate in a vape and they stop you. I think that's probably as true as you can get. By the same token, I don't think anybody, well, I shouldn't say anybody, I don't think there's a large majority of people in Texas that want to go down the Oregon path where they kind of say, hey, if you can put it in your body, go for it, right? I don't think we're ready to legalize heroin here.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
I was a bit surprised they did that, but
it is what it is, and so we get in this puts us in a situation, I think, that when we go talk about changing regulations, when we have a session that's going on where there's multiple, how many are there, 15, 20 bills proposed dealing with hemp, it gets you in a situation where there's a lot of fussing and fighting. Kind of reminds you a little bit of putting 2 cats in a sack, right?
Yeah, the legislative sessions here are very interesting.
But they argue about stuff that may or may not really be important, right? And they have this argument, like I pointed out before, from a legal standpoint, because really when you're dealing with legislatures, you're dealing with primarily lawyers. Whereas the USDA clearly wrote this for a chemist. They clearly wrote it with the intent that a chemist can read it and say, I understand what that says.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you to Mark from Krause Analytical. And this is going to be one of 2 parts. Part 2 will be next week. Please join us, and thank you for being here, and happy hunting.